WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange has returned home to Australia after being declared free by a US court in Sapien. His 14-year-long legal battle with the American establishment has finally concluded. WikiLeaks became famous around the globe in 2010 when it released hundreds and thousands of documents in tranches known as the Afghan war logs, the Iraq war logs, and Cablegate. Assange exposed the war crimes of America to the world. His most famous expose is the video called Collateral Murder. It shows an Apache helicopter mowing down 11 people on 12th of July 2007 in Baghdad. Now, these compromised a group of Iraqi civilians and 2 journalists. WikiLeaks has also revealed how the US NSA was routinely spying on foreign officials from Japan, European Union, Israel, Germany, and Brazil. For this and for the 490,000 odd documents that were released, Julian Assange was wanted by Washington. From 2012 to 2019, Assange took refuge in Ecuador's London embassy. This ended when he was dragged out and put behind bars. From 2019 to 2024, he languished in Britain's high-security Belmarsh Prison and was released 2 days ago. America hounded him for almost a decade and a half. He has been freed only after striking a deal with the US Justice Department. For this, he has had to plead guilty to a singular felony charge of espionage. Now, the United States claims to be the country that champions free speech. A self-styled free speech defender, it chastises other countries across the globe, including us, for apparently stifling the dissenting voices. But who are they to lecture us? They spy on their own allies, they violate the Geneva Conventions and chase down our whistleblowers. What are the lessons that we learn from this? Let's start this conversation. On the telecast with me is Ambassador Suresh Goyal. Ambassador, how do you view that after a long ordeal of 14 years, Julian Assange has been released, but conditionally after he agreed to having participated in espionage charges that had been levied against him by the US State Department?
Megha, thank you very much. I think it's a very important issue, not for the reasons that you mentioned in your opening remarks, but for various other reasons, which I will come to in a minute. And thank you really for making me part of it, because I have a very different take on what we are discussing. Look, first of all, espionage, even on one's own citizens, and I'm saying it with great responsibility here, when the national securities are concerned, seeking information, collating information, analyzing information in the interest of national security is a matter of responsibility for all states, and all states do it. Espionage is as old as Chanakya was. Chanakya recommended espionage, even within the state, to keep the state updated on the information, whether you do it in a covert manner, overt manner, whatever it is, and every state does it. Let us face it. Therefore, nobody is innocent in this world to say that we will not spy to get the information. We all seek information. I think this case was important for 2 or 3 different reasons. First, Julian Assange proved how fragile the system of information is in the modern age. If a person like Julian Assange could hack into the servers, secure servers, supposed to be the securest servers, and get the information out, I mean, how secure was the information in this modern age? Number one. Number two, having secured the information, he was not bound by any law of, or any treaty, any agreement, any obligation to the US states to not publish what he has found. Legally, I'm speaking. And therefore, he published the information that he got, irresponsible for some, delightful for many others, who were able to point finger at the USA and say that, look, this is what you are doing. And this is exactly what you said. Who is the USA to tell us about the free speech and everything if this is what they have done to Julian Assange?
Right.
But they were to do that to the USA. Number three, I think what happened is that irresponsible act of publishing the information without thinking of the consequences, endangering the lives of thousands of people who were covered in those dispatches. Now, I know that for a fact because ultimately the security of people who are involved in these operations becomes a matter of top priority for everyone. And last point, I would say the fragility of the judicial system, if after having done the felony of publishing the secure information, endangering the lives of thousands of people, he can get away so easily by pleading a deal with the US state and get completely out of it, admittedly, after 14 years of isolation. What does the justice system really mean? Nothing. So basically, it all becomes a question of deals and deals and deals, and you can do what you want and get out of it if you're smart enough.
Okay.
So it's that kind of a thing that we need to think of. Megha.
Okay, that's one way of putting it. But also take a look at the other side of the coin. Ray Locker is joining me, Washington Enterprise editor for USA Today. And Ray, how do you view this situation? Because on one hand, if America is charging Julian Assange of espionage, and on the other, it praises and supports somebody like a Snowden, who is also in prison because he exposed classified information about the Russian military. Now, how does this work?
Well, Snowden is not in prison, and he didn't expose information about the Russian military. He exposed information about the US military and then fled to Russia. So, totally different situation. Going back to your original points, is the United States hypocritical? Of course it is. It has been for more than 240 years. Every nation state does the same thing, as Ambassador Goel said. And so, yeah, it's a problem. We say one thing, we do another. To me, Julian Assange is no hero, and I say that as somebody who has used the information published by WikiLeaks, but you have to use it in a responsible manner. He just took this stuff and threw it online with no consideration of the consequences, and people died because of it. I don't know how many, but people died because of it. And yes, he exposed some of the cruelties of the U.S. involvement in Iraq, which, by the way, were no secret. He illuminated some of those secrets, and that was helpful. And I think that helped speed what was admittedly a slow exit from Iraq. But he's no hero, not in my mind. I mean, he did stuff. He had no consideration of the ramifications of it. He didn't stand up and deal with it in court. He went and hid out in the Ecuadorian embassy. He could have said, oh, you know what? You want to try me? Fine. Let's do that. And let's have the evidence come out. Look, people always talk about Daniel Ellsberg and the Pentagon Papers and that case that started in 1971. Daniel Ellsberg went to trial and was acquitted or had a mistrial. So he faced justice. Snowden and Assange did not. And Assange was not really accountable. So in my mind, he's no hero. I think it's a good thing that this case is over with because it allows all the sides to move on. And the guy has obviously, paid a price, if not the price of an actual court decision.
Okay, Oleg. Sorry. I was actually referring to Alexei Navalny, who's now dead. But at the same time, also, this is a fine line that a journalist has to follow or tread. Simply because while you're talking about the safety and security of people, you're at the same time looking to expose and tell the true story to the world. And these military attacks that were done in Iraq and in Afghanistan, talking about this classified information where the US military and the NSA, they were spying on the allies, whether it was European Union or Saudi Arabia or Israel. So are you at this point in time discounting the American government, that this is part and parcel of how governments and military and this intelligence services function in every country?
Well, I'm not, giving the U.S. government a free pass. And by the way, I'm not a representative of the U.S. government. But I will say that, look, governments lie to each other, even if they're allied governments. So, was the U.S. listening in on Israeli communications? Of course it was. And Israel has sent spies to the United States to take U.S. Secrets and bring them back to Israel. You look at the Jonathan Pollard case from the 80s. So, Israel is not a neutral or clean actor, nor is any other country. They want stuff from us, they take it. They want to use it to their own advantage, and they don't tell us the truth about it. So we use the NSA to listen in on their conversations. And by the way, they should all realize that it's not a nice business. But you get messy when you're running a nation state like the United States or any other place. And so there's a certain element of hypocrisy involved, totally. But that's just the way it goes, unfortunately.
Okay. Professor Nalapat, your view on the situation, and particularly when, there have been instances in the past where the government of India has asked certain journalists to leave the country for the kind of articles they've written or the documentaries that they've made. And India has been panned internationally and particularly by the United States of America, talking about freedom of press, talking about freedom to express yourself. Now, it goes both ways.
Well, Megha, you're quite right. The Indian government simply asked them to leave or did not renew their visas. It certainly did not send them to jail. In this particular case, let me remind you that Julian Assange did not do any espionage whatsoever. That was done by a soldier in the US military who is now called Chelsea Manning. At that point in time was called Bradley Manning, as I recall. And he is the one who essentially took that data from confidential files and leaked it to WikiLeaks. Julian Assange was not spying. He was simply reporting, point number one. Point number two, I'd like to say that, for the 14 years, he has suffered basically for reporting certain facts. I quite agree that he redacted. There is no question about that. And possibly some people have paid with their lives. Well, others have paid with their lives for the withdrawal from Afghanistan in 2021, ordered by President Biden. He did it in a way that even the logistical support to the Afghan National Army was cut off. And the Taliban took over. And lo and behold, they had a complete list ready waiting for them of US sources. So who's responsible for that? I would say that Justice Bradley Manning was sent to jail, in my view, correctly, for being a US military official who leaked secrets. This whoever has allowed the negligence of allowing the names of sources to the US of the Afghan administration and military, and these sources were later put to death in a very horrible way. I think that individual also should pay the same price as Manning paid. Assange, I can again tell you, was not first of all, most important. What is worrying about this development is not simply that Assange did not spy. Yes, he was negligent. He ought to have redacted the names. And I think that is something that is definitely a fact. But the reality is he has served 14 years in Ecuadorian embassy. Was not still like staying in a luxury hotel. It was imprisonment in a way, and subsequently in conditions of solitude, where, judging from the few images that were there, it is not pleasant at all. So I don't believe that he ought to have been sent to jail in the first place. Certainly, the individual who sent those things to him ought to have been sent to jail, because most worrisome, Assange is not a US citizen. I agree with you. If you're a citizen of a country, you have a patriotic duty to do what is right for your country. I fully agree. But Assange was an Australian citizen. He had not signed an oath of allegiance to the United States or to its constitution. And what this means is that the US law can extend to any part of the world. So any of us who report something which the US administration decides is damaging to national interest can then be found guilty and prosecuted and persecuted around the world. This kind of extraterritorial kind of assumption of prosecutorial rights, especially over journalists, is completely unpardonable. And I would like to say that from a very early period, I have been saying that it is unpardonable and Julian Assange needs to be freed. 14 years has been a very long time. Incidentally, that's a life sentence in Indian penal law.
Yeah. Particularly, I again raised the question of the thin line that a journalist has to tread. And as Professor Nalapat said, that if he were a citizen of the United States of America, the Espionage Act would have been implemented on him. And while there has been a deal that has been cracked between the US Department of Justice and Julian Assange, let's also take into account if something similar were to happen and he were to expose documents related to the intelligence services of the Australian government, should he be tried or should he not be tried for espionage, keeping in mind that the man is a journalist? His job is to put the truth out in public domain.
Well, I think every profession comes with a certain kind of reasonable restrictions. That is something that should be there. So I think, it's up to the governments to decide whether they want to take any action or not for the respective countries if you are a citizen. But my issue, Megha, I'm not bypassing your question. My issue is something else. The issue is this. We often hear these grand sermons and lectures of wisdoms from the West, especially the United States, on issues of freedom of speech, freedom of expression, right to information, on issues of tolerance and intolerance, on what the government of India should do. And then, when it comes to the West and the United States, what they have done, perhaps with an Edward Snowden or a Julian Assange, doesn't give the right kind of a picture, because exactly this is what I'm trying to say, that whenever India, this election that happened in India, and the kind of foreign interference, the kind of evidence that is coming in, every time India would ask us, a journalist to just honorably leave the country, you would see the Western press will project a very different picture of it. That's one. That's a given. Now, see, Julian Assange can even be tried by United States as an enemy of the state. You cannot do something, I cannot do something. So look at this. CIA has redefined WikiLeaks as a non-state hostile intelligence service. Now, if this is the way you treat media, then you should have no right. West and especially United States should have no right if any other country does it. Then you cannot say to India that when India takes action, that you will be put down into the freedom of press index. Okay. Because then you play another game of pitting down countries to your manipulative indexes to show that how bad you are.
Okay.
Just give me 10 seconds. The other big issue for me is this, Megha. What has Edward Snowden and Julian Assange revealed? All the time we hear from the West that Chinese technology is not safe. But the kind of revelation that came out from WikiLeaks, especially about Vault 7, the manner in which the American surveillance agencies, intelligence agencies can bypass all kind of encryptions, can compromise your smartphone, your smart card, your operating system, everything. That is something which is dangerous. Edward Snowden talks about one thing, how the Five Eyes intelligence organizations work in tandem with telecommunication companies to spy on you, which means you and me. So then the question arises, of course, I am a strong supporter when the government of India has restrictions put on the Chinese technologies and Chinese companies. But then should we completely be trusting the Western companies or the Western organizations like the social media companies, the tech giants whose role in this particular election in India is questionable?
Okay.
So this is where the issue is. Okay. How much we can consider that the Chinese are a strong adversary, which they are, but the West is a good ally of us. Because yes, everybody has
Ray, would you like to answer that question, particularly the issue that has been raised by Patikrit, talking about how the West at this point, the United States of America particularly, becomes the advocate of free speech and looks down upon countries such as India. And as he said that, how does India get put down as the as the last number or the least, and the country which has the least freedom of press index?
Well, as somebody who's been a practitioner in the U.S. media for a long time, I say that we operate with a relative degree of freedom that I don't see in other places. However, I don't really think it's the United States' place to be telling other countries how to run its affairs in terms of how it deals with people. I mean, Americans can express their opinions, as we do all around the world. And as we're on this show, people from other parts of the world are expressing their opinions about how we do things. But I don't think the United States should be in the business of getting into India's affairs and saying this person or that person is a problem, or you shouldn't be doing this. I think it happens on a case-by-case basis. You have to examine what's happening and, use local considerations and your own considerations in coming to some kind of opinion. I don't really have a better answer than that.
No, because just a month ago, when the elections were going on in the country, the United States of America even raised questions about the Supreme Court of India. They spoke about how the justice needs to be fair and equitable for everybody. And this was with regards to a leader of the opposition who was put behind bars for a liquor excise scam.
Right. And, from my reading of that situation, I thought that he was treated unfairly. But that's my perspective here. Obviously, I don't know all the facts that you know. But that was my impression here, and I think the United States spoke out about that.
Yeah, but does a foreign government has the right to come out and make a statement, a sweeping statement at that, without, I don't know what may have been the intention of the government. What was the reason they came out and made a statement such as this? What vested interest did they have in speaking out in the manner that they did?
Just a general sense of fairness. Again, I don't speak for the U.S. government. That's my impression here. And by the way, the Indian government says things about what the United States does or doesn't do. And the same with Canada. When you talk about, the people from Khalistan and those protesters, and they say, do this or do that, or you're not doing something. So we're certainly not immune from that. Other countries say that about what we do, as they should. And, I live in the United States. I'm a U.S. citizen. I grew up in this culture, but I know that we're not perfect. I know that we're rife with hypocrisy. And I know that in the world stage, a country that elected Donald Trump as president and all the stuff that he's done is certainly not immune from criticism. So,
okay. Ambassador Goel, would you like to comment on this? What Ray has to say?
I think on these matters, those who are practitioners of foreign relations and the foreign policy, and those who are not, those who are on the other end of it really, have a different. Now, having been part of the diplomacy, bureaucracy, whatever you want to call it, the governments do what they have to do in the interest of perpetuating, protecting what they see as the national interest of the countries. As Ray said, we call USA sometimes. I'm not saying fair, unfair, etc. It's just a matter of fact. We criticize the USA, we criticize Russia sometimes, we criticize every country, we are criticized. But the important thing really is the larger interests which actually guide the relations between India and those countries. They remain. And those larger interests, for example, like India and USA. The USA may call India out of the human rights, religion, blah, 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 and all those things. But you don't think the relations between India and USA have far greater depth and substance today than ever before? Because those are guided by the strategic interest now, global strategic interest. And therefore, I would say, number one, I don't think the public behavior or the public pronouncements are exactly an index of what our foreign policy texture. Number one. Number two, You refer to documentary. Now, look, I recall a time when a leader of the country was associated with the state. We need to keep in mind the distinction between the leader and the state. India is far greater, far greater. The sum of every leader that we have in the past or now we are going to have. And therefore, to take the criticism of a leader as a criticism of a country, I think is the huge mistake we would do, because then we would actually kind of confuse or the interest of India as the interest of a person. And that will be a harakiri.
Okay, all right, fair enough. I'm out of time. I thank all my guests for joining me on the telecast and sharing their views.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.